Greetings. Following the shooting in a South Carolina church of June 17, 2015, the Confederate flag debate began to rage once again across the American landscape. Later that month, I read an article in Atlanta Muslim Weekly entitled, "Dear White People." The writer chronicled experience with racism and discrimination. Unfortunately, I was able to relate to harsh words, threats, and acts of violence from my own life experience as a Hispanic growing up in Georgia during the 70s and 80s. The article included the image you can see here of a car, the controversial flag, and a terribly interesting notation. It's a Skynyrd thing. I related to this as well. Not only did I grow up listening to and appreciating Lynyrd Skynyrd's music, it was also the music of my racist schoolmates and neighbors. This gave me pause to consider a number of things. Firstly, dear white people is much too wide of a net to be cast linked to the flag and or racism. Secondly, it is this sort of position that is creating symbolic meaning for the flag that perhaps wasn't there for some of the people who recognized it merely as a Skynyrd thing. And finally, what is a Skynyrd thing? I would argue it's probably not what most people think. In the slides to follow, I want to tease that out a bit. After first reading the Dear White People article, I used it as a reference point in 2 sociology courses I teach. Recently, I was powerfully reminded of the wide net issue in the piece. A student group organizer from Emory University sent an email inviting Hispanic alums to visit the new Latino Center during homecoming weekend. This innocent invitation sparked a flurry of angry responses. Some didn't like being called Latino. Others didn't appreciate being included on the list. Some resented the concept of a Latino Center in and of itself. And one fellow railed against the Aztec decor of the new center. In short, the grouping of all these folks into one large group, even for a positive reason, gave way to a great deal of backlash. I recalled the Dear White People article. In a post-9/11 world, Muslims know all too well the terrible mistake of being lumped into one category. There are popular radio show hosts in Atlanta who continue to suggest that all Muslims are terrorists. Of course we know better. The issue here is it's a big tent. We can't make blanket statements about whites, Muslims, Hispanics, or even Lynyrd Skynyrd fans.
I first became involved in the debate around the Georgia state flag in the early 1990s. Atlanta was going to host the Summer Olympic Games in 1996. There was a movement that started to change the flag because of its symbolic negative connotations prior to having the eyes of the world on the city for a month in July. So this movement began and there was debate back and forth, and the flag did not change before the games. And during this time, my position was that there might be different perceived meanings across communities. The main one that people were raising, and was rightly so, was that the flag of 1956 was a reactionary flag that had been changed because of the Brown versus Board of Education. Since that time, a generation had passed. New meanings had been attached to the flag, and this very debate of the 1990s led to new symbolic meanings being learned and taught related to the flag that perhaps weren't there in the existing communities. Well, the flag didn't get changed until 2001, and then it got changed again rapidly in 2003. During both of those changes, I was an elected official, and I was engaged in the conversation once again, but this time more than anything over the cost for changing the flags at the state, city, and county levels. The flag in the state of Georgia has been changed 3 times in 60 plus years, and each time has had very little to do with the state or the citizens of Georgia.
I think it's interesting. There's a word that we can use in the English language, rednecks. Folks use it. People know what it means. People have a mental image when it comes up. We can use it sort of in public and private. It's very interesting in the whole scheme of other words that we cannot use. Jeff Foxworthy, a widely known comedian and actor, made rednecks famous when he says you may be a redneck if kind of thing. So I took Jeff Foxworthy's idea. I looked a quick internet search of other comedians and came up with some ideas, sort of like the recipe for rednecks. And the thing is that people mentioned over and over when they're talking about rednecks, sort of they give some ways that they can identify them. They use sex, drugs, music, guns, and mama. I want to take those topics, those themes, and I want to address them for rednecks, but I also don't want to let go of this whole it's a Skynyrd thing, because the point is I think there is something to heritage and something to cultural context that's being ignored when people are looking at the Confederate flag. When thinking of the Skynyrd thing concept, one can analyze the lyrics of a few of Lynyrd Skynyrd's well-known songs and find very strong core values. I completely understand that this is a short list and it's not fully representative of the band's entire canon. And I'm keenly aware that not all of Lynyrd Skynyrd's music is laden with ethical messages. But what I'm doing here is using the Foxworthy redneck theme that I suggested a moment ago. And I'm going to submit that there are Lynyrd Skynyrd songs that have messages that are directly related to those themes that many would not expect to find. So, for example, relationships and sex is best addressed in Lynyrd Skynyrd's iconic anthem Freebird, where there's a sense of clarity and, if nothing else, honesty. Where in the dialogue the person says, I have to be moving on, I can't stay. So there's a level of honesty there. There's another song, Saturday Night Special, which has clear lyrics. It's an anti-gun song that says that guns aren't good for anything but killing a person, putting them 6 feet in a hole. There's a wonderful song called Simple Man, which theoretically is a mother giving advice to her son, quite Buddhist in nature, giving him a sense of divine power, making good choices, being considerate of others. There's a wonderful song, The Ballad of Curtis Lowe, where there's the idea that perhaps that this person or this person's portrait or mosaic of other people who inspired the real band members from Jacksonville, Florida, to be engaged in making music at all. And another interesting thing, as we're talking about race here, that song describes Curtis Lowe not only as being a black man but as an alcoholic. And so two things that society puts very low on our class system, these guys raise this fellow up. They have a great deal of respect for him because of his ability to make music. And then finally, there's the song The Needle and the Spoon, about cocaine and heroin, which again, much like the Saturday Night Special song, is a clear song against the use of drugs, talks about it could lead to nothing but death. And there is a sense that perhaps somebody struggled with drugs in their own experience. So as you can see, those are some clearly set ethical choices within the concepts of sex, guns, mama, music, and drugs that most people wouldn't consider to be Lynyrd Skynyrd things. The topic of race was not on the Jeff Foxworthy theme list. However, I'd be remiss not to bring it up because this is what we're really talking about here, is race. And there's a song that many people are familiar with. There's a little trope. It says, how do you get a redneck to scream? Play Sweet Home Alabama. Well, it's interesting. A lot of people connect that song to racism. It does have some sort of undertones of racism. But the song is clearly written in response to 2 songs that Neil Young had written and performed about folks in the South, particularly Alabama. And he used a wide net to group a bunch of people together and assume that they're all racist. And so this song is in response to that. Neil Young later acknowledged that the guys from Lynyrd Skynyrd were correct and he had overstepped his boundaries. Their song, again, is really not about racism so much. It acknowledges it, but it's about tolerance. And the way you can know that they're keenly aware of racism is in this line, this confusing line, where it says, in Birmingham, they love the governor. Boo hoo hoo. Well, there you have it. The writer of the song is crying. Actually, 3 of the guys wrote the song, of which none of them are from Alabama. But at any rate, they're crying about it because the events, the horrific civil rights events in the 60s, where the Governor Wallace was engaged in that, is an awful thing. And so those people in Birmingham who love the governor, sort of a bad deal. They're crying, complaining about that. But then later, by the time they're writing this song, 1974, 75, thereabouts, George Wallace is the governor again in a non-consecutive term. By this time, there has been an attempt on his life. He's had a religious revelation. He has retracted his racism, his racist statements of the past. And so then there's this final line, or near the end line, it says, well, the skies are so blue and the governor's true. Again, some people are kind of confused by that. Well, all you need to do is a little bit of history to see that there has been a major monumental change in the governor, even though it's the same man.
Growing up in Atlanta in the 70s and 80s, I was the only person of color in my neighborhood. I was regularly threatened, ridiculed, and people physically attacked me. An interesting note is some of these people were the parents of my classmates. And of course my classmates, not all of them, but many were engaged as well. Most of these people, particularly the ones I knew well, I lived in the neighborhood with them, they defined themselves as rednecks, and a large majority of them were Lynyrd Skynyrd fans. So to be clear, this was my cultural context. So over the course of time, I became a Lynyrd Skynyrd fan, and I also counted myself as a redneck. I understand what it means when they say it's a Skynyrd thing. Unfortunately, I also understand the very harsh reality of racism. I try to tease out these lived experiences as opposing viewpoints in the classes that I teach to help delineate issues related to culture, heritage, tradition, and most importantly, tolerance. The reactionary Dear White People article ignores much of this. So what I'm suggesting here is that there are and have been many people who see the flag as a material cultural item that symbolizes being Southern, maybe being a redneck, or perhaps just simply a Skynyrd thing. It's articles like Dear White People and the political rallies of late that are leading to a co-opting of this flag. Protester actions are changing the symbolic meaning of the flag for themselves and for the people who have the flags. There are historic examples of this, and two good ones are the swastika, which lost its sacred meaning to become a wholly related object linked to the Nazi regime. And then there's the Arabic word jihad, which has been converted from a theological concept of striving or struggling to mean holy war. This is the sort of issue at stake when one casts wide nets on entire sets of people based on a single interpretation of a material cultural item like the flag.